The morning of my graduation from Stanford School of Medicine started like most significant days in my life, with disappointment from my family. While other graduates were receiving flowers, congratulatory texts, and excited calls from relatives, I sat alone in my apartment, adjusting my cap and gown with no one to share the moment. My phone buzzed once. A text from Mom, "We'll be there. Try not to trip on stage." That was it. No, congratulations. No, we're proud of you. Just a reminder that even on my biggest day they expected me to embarrass them somehow. I had earned my master's in healthcare administration with a 4.0 GPA while working part-time at 3 different medical facilities. For 6 years I'd studied complex healthcare systems, insurance regulations, medical billing procedures and patient advocacy protocols. I'd written my thesis on navigating insurance appeals in complex medical cases, and had already been offered positions at 2 major hospital systems. But to my family I was still just Emma, the daughter who'd chosen the easy path instead of becoming a lawyer like my brother David or a surgeon like my cousin Marcus. The graduation ceremony was held in Stanford's main auditorium, a massive space filled with proud families celebrating their graduates' achievements. I spotted my parents, my brother David and my sister Michelle sitting in the middle section, looking like they were attending a mandatory work meeting rather than their daughter's graduation. As I walked across the stage to receive my diploma, I caught sight of them in the audience. Mom was checking her phone, Dad was looking at his watch and Michelle was taking a selfie with David. None of them were even watching as the dean announced my name and academic honors. When I returned to my seat, the family next to mine was cheering wildly for their graduate. The grandmother was crying happy tears, the father was taking dozens of photos, and the siblings were holding up a homemade banner that read, "We're so proud of you." I felt a sharp pang of envy watching their celebration. That's what I'd always imagined my graduation would look like, a family genuinely excited about my accomplishments, proud of the hard work I'd put in, eager to celebrate this milestone with me. Instead, I had 3 people who couldn't wait for the ceremony to end. After the official proceedings concluded, families flooded onto the lawn outside the auditorium for pictures and celebrations. I found my family standing near the parking lot, clearly ready to leave. "Finally done embarrassing this family with your worthless degree," Mom whispered as I approached, her voice carrying just enough for nearby families to hear. The words hit me like a physical blow, especially on what should have been one of the proudest days of my life. Dad nodded in agreement, his arms crossed tightly across his chest. 6 years of school for what? Hospital paperwork. "At least it's over," Michelle added, rolling her eyes dramatically. "Now maybe you can get a real job and stop living like a college student forever." David, fresh out of law school and already working at a prestigious firm downtown, smiled smugly. "Some people just aim lower, I guess. Not everyone can handle the pressure of a real professional program." Their words stung, but I'd learned over the years not to react. Any defense of my chosen field would just lead to more mockery, more comparisons to David's superior career choice, and more reminders that I was the family disappointment. "Can we at least take a few pictures?" I asked, still wearing my cap and gown, hoping to salvage something positive from the day. Mom sighed dramatically as if I'd asked her to climb Mount Everest. "I suppose we should document this achievement, but make it quick. David has dinner reservations." "Dinner reservations?" I asked hopefully. "Are we celebrating?" "David's celebrating," Dad corrected. "He just made partner track at his firm. We figured we could kill 2 birds with 1 stone, your graduation and his real accomplishment." Of course. Even my graduation day had to be about David's success. We took exactly 5 pictures, with my parents looking like they were posing for a police lineup rather than celebrating their daughter's academic achievement. Mom kept checking her phone between shots, Dad looked at his watch repeatedly, and Michelle spent the entire time texting her friends about how bored she was. "This healthcare administration thing," Mom said dismissively while we waited for David to adjust the camera. "What exactly do you plan to do with it?" "File medical records." "It's much more complex than that," I began, but Dad cut me off. "Spare us the sales pitch, Emma. We know it's just fancy paperwork. David deals with real problems, life-changing cases. You'll be shuffling papers in some back office." David nodded condescendingly. "No offense, but healthcare administration sounds like something they train people for in community college. Not exactly Stanford-level work." "Actually," I said quietly. The program is highly competitive. Only 30 students were accepted this year out of over 800 applicants. Michelle laughed. That's because nobody wants to do boring hospital stuff. The smart people go to law school or medical school. Like Marcus, Mom added proudly. Now there's someone who made something of himself. A surgeon at 32 making real money, saving actual lives. The comparison to my cousin Marcus was a familiar pain. He was the family golden child, the one everyone pointed to as an example of success. Meanwhile, I was treated like the family charity case, the one they tolerated out of obligation. Are you coming to dinner? Mom asked, though her tone made it clear she hoped I'd decline. Actually, I have plans, I lied, not wanting to spend my graduation dinner listening to 2 hours of praise for David while my achievement was ignored or worse, mocked. Probably for the best, Dad said. These celebration dinners are really for people with something meaningful to celebrate. As they walked toward the parking lot, I heard Michelle say loudly, "Thank God she's not coming." Can you imagine trying to explain to the waitstaff what a healthcare administration degree even is? How embarrassing. Their laughter echoed across the graduation lawn as I stood alone in my cap and gown, watching other families take photo after photo, their joy genuine and infectious. I felt more isolated than ever, wondering why I'd even invited them to witness what they clearly considered a non-achievement. Other graduates were being taken out for elaborate celebration dinners, receiving flowers and gifts, having their families brag to strangers about their accomplishments. I was getting criticized for choosing a field my family didn't understand and being uninvited from my own graduation dinner. But then as they reached their car, Mom's phone rang. I was still close enough to hear her answer with her usual clipped, professional tone. "Hello, this is Catherine Mitchell." "Mrs. Mitchell, this is Jennifer Walsh from Pacific General Hospital's billing department. I'm calling about your insurance claim from last month's cardiac procedure." I watched Mom's posture immediately stiffen. She'd had a minor heart procedure a few weeks earlier, nothing serious, but it had required an overnight stay and some follow-up care. Insurance had been giving her some trouble, but she'd assured everyone it was just routine paperwork delays. "Oh yes," Mom said, her voice already showing signs of stress. "What's the update on that?" "I'm afraid I have some concerning news. Your claim has been denied again and we've exhausted the standard appeals process. The paperwork discrepancies are more complex than we initially thought, and there are coding errors that are affecting your coverage." I could see the color starting to drain from Mom's face as she gripped the phone tighter. "What does that mean exactly?" she asked, her voice smaller now. "You're looking at approximately $127,000 in out-of-pocket expenses for the procedure, the hospital stay, the specialist consultations and the follow-up care." The phone nearly slipped from Mom's hand. $127,000? But I was told everything would be covered under my plan. Dad had moved closer, his face growing increasingly concerned as he tried to listen to the conversation. "I understand your shock, Mrs. Mitchell. Unfortunately, these healthcare billing situations can be extremely complex. The insurance company is claiming that certain procedures weren't pre-authorized correctly, and there are discrepancies between what your cardiologist submitted and what the hospital coded." Mom's hand was visibly shaking now. But I can't afford that. We don't have that kind of money." "I completely understand your position. These cases require someone with specialized knowledge of medical billing procedures, insurance protocols and healthcare administration to navigate the appeals process effectively." I stood frozen, watching my mother panic about the exact field she'd been mocking just minutes earlier. "A healthcare administration specialist?" Mom repeated weakly. "Yes, someone with expertise in medical coding, insurance regulations, billing procedures and patient advocacy. They understand the system from the inside and know how to communicate with insurance companies in their own language. Without that expertise, cases like yours rarely get resolved favorably." Mom hung up the phone looking devastated. The confident, dismissive woman who'd been mocking my degree 20 minutes earlier was gone, replaced by someone who looked genuinely terrified. "What's wrong?" David asked immediately. "The insurance." Mom's voice was barely a whisper. "They're denying the claim. We owe $127,000. The family went silent. That amount of money would destroy their finances, potentially force them to sell their house and devastate their retirement plans. David, you can help us fight this, right? Dad asked desperately. Legal action, lawsuits, something? David shifted uncomfortably, suddenly looking much less confident than usual. Dad, this isn't really my area of expertise. I do corporate law, mergers, acquisitions, business contracts. Medical billing disputes are completely different. But you're a lawyer. Mom protested, grasping for any solution. Medical billing law is incredibly specialized, David admitted reluctantly. It involves healthcare regulations, insurance protocols, medical coding systems. It's like a completely different language. The panic in their voices was growing. These were the same people who'd spent years dismissing my chosen field as paperwork and easy, and now they were discovering that it involved complex systems they couldn't even begin to understand. So what do we do? Michelle asked, for once looking genuinely concerned instead of bored. We need to hire someone, Dad said grimly. A specialist like the hospital suggested. That could cost thousands just in consulting fees, Mom said, her voice breaking. And there's no guarantee they can fix it. David nodded slowly. Healthcare administration consultants charge premium rates because their expertise is so specialized. We could be looking at $15,000 to $20,000 just to hire someone good enough to handle a case this complex. As they stood there in the parking lot, the reality of their situation began to sink in. They needed exactly the kind of expertise they'd been mocking, and they couldn't afford to hire it. Mom's phone rang again. This time it was her cardiologist's office with additional questions about insurance coverage for her follow-up appointments. As she struggled to understand the medical terminology and coding requirements, I watched Dad's frustration grow. This is impossible, Mom said after ending the call. They're asking about procedure codes, billing modifiers, network providers. I don't understand any of this. It's like they're speaking a foreign language, Dad agreed, his earlier confidence completely gone. Michelle looked around helplessly. There has to be someone who can help us. We need someone who understands how hospitals work from the inside, David said slowly. Someone who knows the billing systems, the insurance protocols, the medical coding. The silence that followed was deafening. All four of them stood there, slowly realizing that they'd spent years dismissing exactly the expertise they now desperately needed. Finally, Michelle spoke up hesitantly. Didn't Emma just graduate with some kind of healthcare degree? All eyes turned to me. I was still standing nearby in my cap and gown, having witnessed their entire crisis unfold. Mom looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time. Emma, what exactly does your degree cover? I could have walked away. After years of having my field dismissed and my career choices mocked, part of me wanted to let them figure out their own mess. They'd made it clear that my education was worthless, that my expertise didn't matter, that I was the family disappointment. But despite everything, they were still my family. And this was an opportunity to show them exactly what my worthless degree could do. Healthcare administration, I said calmly. Medical billing procedures, insurance protocols, healthcare systems management, regulatory compliance, appeals processes, medical coding, patient advocacy. Dad's eyes widened. That sounds exactly like what we need. I also completed specialized certifications in insurance claim resolution and medical billing dispute management, I continued. My thesis focused specifically on navigating complex insurance appeals in cases where initial claims have been denied. Mom stared at me in amazement. You learned how to fix problems like this? It's literally what I've spent 6 years studying, I said. Healthcare administration isn't just filing paperwork. It's understanding how medical systems work, how to navigate insurance bureaucracy, how to identify billing errors, how to advocate for patients when the system fails them. The transformation in their expressions was remarkable. Suddenly, my worthless degree was the most valuable thing in the world. The hospital billing representative mentioned that these cases require someone who can communicate with insurance companies in their own language, I added. That's exactly what healthcare administrators are trained to do. David looked genuinely impressed for the first time in years. So you actually know how to fight insurance companies and win? Among other things, yes. I've interned at 3 different medical facilities, worked on dozens of billing disputes, and helped patients navigate insurance appeals. It's what I do. Dad shook his head in disbelief. All this time we thought you were wasting your education on something easy. Maybe we should have asked more questions about what you were actually studying, Mom admitted quietly, her voice filled with regret. Could you? Mom hesitated, clearly struggling to ask for help from the daughter she'd been dismissing minutes earlier. Would you be able to help us with this? I looked at my family, the same people who'd made me feel ashamed of my accomplishments just an hour ago, who'd uninvited me from my own graduation celebration, who'd spent years treating my career choice as a joke. Part of me wanted to say no, to let them experience the consequences of dismissing something they didn't understand. But this was also an opportunity to demonstrate the real value of my education and to help my family when they needed it most. I'll need to see all your paperwork, I said. Insurance cards, medical records, billing statements, procedure codes, everything from the original consultation through the follow-up care. We have everything at home, Dad said eagerly. How long do you think this might take to resolve? Depends on the complexity of the errors and how cooperative the insurance company is willing to be, but I've seen cases like this completely reversed in a matter of weeks with the right approach and documentation. Mom looked like she might cry with relief. Emma, I had no idea your degree was so practical and important. Most people don't understand what healthcare administration involves, I said diplomatically. They think it's just paperwork and filing, but it's really about understanding incredibly complex systems and advocating for people who get lost in the bureaucracy. David was shaking his head in amazement. That actually sounds like more challenging work than what I do. At least corporate law follows logical patterns. Healthcare systems sound like controlled chaos. They can be, I agreed. That's why it takes specialized training to navigate them effectively. Michelle put her phone away for the first time all day. So you actually fight insurance companies for a living? Patient advocacy is a big part of it, yes. When someone gets a $127,000 bill for a procedure that should have been covered, there's usually a way to fix it if you know how the system works. Dad looked at me with what might have been respect for the first time in years. All this time, we thought you were choosing an easy path instead of something challenging like law or medicine. Healthcare administration requires understanding medical terminology, insurance law, billing regulations, coding systems, patient privacy laws, and advocacy procedures, I explained. It's not easier than other fields, it's just different. And apparently exactly what we need right now, Mom said softly. That evening, instead of David's promotion celebration dinner, we went back to my parents' house. I spread their medical paperwork across the dining room table and began working through their case systematically. Within the first hour, I'd identified multiple problems with how their claim had been processed. The hospital had used incorrect billing codes for 2 of the procedures, the insurance company had applied the wrong deductible schedule, and there were 3 separate authorizations that should have been pre-approved but hadn't been properly submitted. How did you spot these errors so quickly? Dad asked, watching me work through the documentation. Training and experience, I said simply. When you understand how the system is supposed to work, it's easier to identify where it went wrong. As I explained each error and outlined my strategy for the appeals process, I watched my family's understanding of my field grow in real time. They began asking genuine questions about healthcare systems, insurance regulations, and patient advocacy work. This is actually fascinating, David said, leaning over my shoulder to read the insurance policy details. I had no idea there was so much complexity behind medical billing. This is like detective work. A lot of healthcare administration is problem-solving, I agreed. You have to be part detective, part advocate, part negotiator, and part translator. Mom was reading through the appeals process documentation I'd prepared. This is incredibly detailed and professional. You really know what you're doing. I've been training for this for 6 years, I reminded her gently. We really didn't understand what you were studying, did we? She asked, her voice filled with genuine regret. No, I said honestly. But that's partially my fault too. I should have done a better job explaining what healthcare administration actually involves. We should have listened better, Dad admitted. We should have asked more questions instead of making assumptions. Over the next 3 weeks, I worked on their case during my free time, treating it like the professional challenge it was. I filed detailed appeals with supporting documentation, corrected billing codes, negotiated directly with insurance representatives, and coordinated between the hospital's billing department, the cardiologist's office, and the insurance company's medical review board. It was exactly the kind of complex, multifaceted case I'd trained for, and I was good at it. Each day brought new challenges: insurance representatives who didn't understand the billing codes, hospital staff who had filed paperwork incorrectly, medical coding errors that cascaded through multiple systems. But I knew how to speak their language, how to navigate their bureaucracy, and how to advocate effectively for my client, in this case my own mother. The breakthrough came during a three-way conference call between myself, the insurance company's senior medical reviewer, and a supervisor from the hospital's billing department. I'd identified a critical error in how the initial authorization had been processed, and I was able to demonstrate that the insurance company had incorrectly applied an out-of-network penalty to procedures performed by in-network providers. Ms. Mitchell, the insurance reviewer said after I'd walked through my documentation, "This is some of the most thorough appeals work I've seen. You clearly understand our systems better than most healthcare administrators I work with." After the call ended, I had to wait 2 business days for the final determination. When the approval came through, I called Mom immediately. "The appeal was successful," I told her. "Your out-of-pocket expense will be $2,400 instead of $127,000. The silence on the other end lasted so long I thought we'd been disconnected. "Emma." Mom's voice was thick with emotion when she finally spoke. "You saved us $124,600? The insurance company made procedural errors and the hospital's billing department made coding mistakes," I explained. "I just knew how to identify and correct them systematically." "How can we ever thank you for this?" she asked, and I could hear her crying. "You don't need to thank me," I said. "This is what family does for each other." And honestly, it was good practice for my career. That weekend, Mom called and asked if I wanted to have a proper graduation celebration dinner. One that would actually be about my achievement, my degree, and my future in healthcare administration. "We owe you a real celebration," she said. "One where we acknowledge what you've accomplished and what you're capable of." The dinner was at the same restaurant where they'd originally planned to celebrate David's promotion while ignoring my graduation. But this time, everything was different. Dad stood up and made a toast before we ordered. "To Emma, whose education we clearly didn't understand, didn't appreciate, and didn't respect the way we should have. You've shown us that meaningful, challenging work comes in many forms, and we're incredibly proud of what you've accomplished. And grateful for what you've learned," Mom added, raising her glass. "You didn't just save our financial future, you opened our eyes to how important and complex your field really is." David raised his glass next. "To my sister, who chose a field that actually helps people solve real problems when they're at their most vulnerable. That's more meaningful than anything I do pushing papers around boardrooms." Even Michelle had put her phone away completely. "I'm sorry I made fun of your degree and called it boring paperwork. What you did for Mom and Dad was incredible, and I had no idea how much skill and knowledge it required." As we ate dinner, they asked me detailed questions about my career plans, my goals in healthcare administration, and how I wanted to use my expertise to help other families navigate the system. For the first time in my life, my family was genuinely interested in my work and genuinely proud of my choices. "I keep thinking about that phone call," Mom said. "The timing was almost like fate. You just graduated, we just dismissed your degree, and then suddenly we needed exactly what you'd spent 6 years learning. Sometimes life has a way of teaching us lessons when we need them most," I said. Dad nodded thoughtfully. "It made me realize how often we dismiss things we don't understand, especially when they're different from what we expected or wanted." "I think I was jealous," David admitted quietly. "Your work actually helps people in crisis. My work helps corporations avoid taxes and navigate regulations. What you do matters more." "Both types of work have value," I said diplomatically. "But I'm glad you can see why I chose this field." A few months later, when I started my new position as senior patient advocate at Pacific General Hospital, ironically, the same hospital that had called Mom about her billing issues, my entire family came to my first day. They took pictures of me in my professional attire, standing in front of the medical center where I'd be helping families navigate the same complex systems I'd helped them through. Mom had printed out copies of the appeals documentation I'd prepared for her case to show her friends as an example of the kind of work I did. "We're proud of you," Dad said as we stood in the hospital lobby, and for the first time in my life I knew he really meant it. "I framed your thesis," Mom added. "It's hanging in the living room next to David's law degree." My graduation day hadn't started the way I'd hoped, but it ended with my family finally understanding that my worthless degree was actually valuable beyond measure. Sometimes the best validation doesn't come from the applause at graduation ceremonies, but from the moment when people realize they desperately need exactly what you have to offer. And sometimes the phone call that changes everything comes at exactly the perfect moment, right when the people who doubted you most need to see the truth about what you've accomplished and who you've become.